The sound of shattering glass sliced through the laughter of the governor's gala like a gunshot. The music stopped instantly. 300 of the city's wealthiest people turned their heads toward the center of the ballroom, where Mercer Calloway stood with a sneer plastered on his face. Mercer, the 29-year-old nephew of the hotel's owner, had just knocked a $500 bottle of vintage Cabernet off a passing tray. Dark red wine pooled rapidly across the pristine, white Italian marble floor. It looked like a crime scene. Mercer didn't apologize. He didn't call for a porter. Instead, his cold eyes locked onto me from across the room. He snapped his fingers, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed in the silence. "Ambrose," he called out, his voice loud enough to reach the back of the room. "Get over here." I walked toward him, keeping my posture straight. I was wearing a tailored suit, just like him. I was the director of operations, not a busboy. "I'll radio housekeeping immediately, Mr. Calloway," I said quietly. Mercer laughed, a cruel, dry sound. "No, we are over budget on cleaning staff this month. You insisted we needed more engineers, remember? So we're short on porters." He pointed a polished leather shoe at the red puddle spreading near his feet. "If you want to keep your pension, Ambrose, show me you're actually useful for once," he hissed, leaning in so only I and the governor could hear. "Clean it up. Now." The room went deathly silent. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was waiting for me to break. I stared at the puddle, then at Mercer's smug face. Slowly, painfully, I lowered myself to my knees. The marble was cold against my kneecaps. I reached for a linen napkin from a nearby table. I could feel the eyes of the staff on me, bartenders I had hired, servers I had trained, people who respected me. Now they were watching their boss humiliate me for sport. "My name is Ambrose Hale. I am 52 years old, and for the last 20 years, I have been the invisible force keeping the Obsidian Grand Hotel alive. I knew every pipe, every wire, and every secret creak of this 100-year-old building. But in that moment, to Mercer Calloway, I was just something to be stepped on. I wiped the floor. The red wine soaked into the white cloth, staining my hands crimson. It looked like blood, the blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into this building for 2 decades. I didn't rush. I cleaned every drop until the stone shined. Slowly, I stood up. My knees popped. I held the sodden, dripping rag in my hand. Mercer smirked, opening his mouth to make another joke. I stepped forward and pressed the dirty, wet rag firmly into his chest. The expensive fabric of his tuxedo absorbed the wine instantly. His jaw dropped. "The floor is clean, Mercer," I said, my voice steady and calm. "And my position is vacant. Effective immediately." I turned my back on him. I walked straight to the front doors, pulled my master keycard from my pocket, and left it on the valet stand. Behind me, I heard Mercer's nervous laughter booming to the guests. "Finally," he shouted. "We can modernize. Out with the old." I sat in my car in the parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The adrenaline that had carried me out of the ballroom evaporated, leaving cold terror in its place. I was 52. I had a mortgage. And because I had just walked out without notice, I had likely forfeited the pension payout I had been building for 20 years. I stared at the hotel looming above me, its golden lights mocking my emptiness. I had given that building my life, and I had left with nothing. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from Miller, the head engineer. "Did you really leave? The boiler pressure is spiking in Zone 4. The manual override isn't working. What's the trick?" My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew the trick. The Zone 4 sensor was faulty. You had to bypass the relay manually with a paperclip and reset the breaker twice. If they didn't do it soon, the hot water would cut out for the entire east wing. I started to type the answer. Then I stopped. I remembered Mercer's laugh. I remembered the wine on my knees. I looked at my shaking hands. I couldn't save them anymore. Not if I wanted to save myself. I didn't block him. I couldn't be that cruel. I simply turned my phone off. I got out of the car and popped the trunk. Inside sat 3 heavy, worn leather notebooks. These were my shadow logs. For 20 years, I had written down every fix, every workaround, and every quirk of the hotel's aging system. The official manuals were garbage. These notebooks were the hotel's brain. And they belonged to me. I slammed the trunk shut and drove away. I learned later, from whispered calls with my former staff, exactly how quickly Mercer tried to erase my legacy. The morning after the gala, he stood in the break room, acting as if the disaster hadn't happened. "We are trimming the fat," Mercer announced to the terrified staff. Ambrose was an expensive dinosaur. We don't need overpriced specialists to run a building. We need efficiency. He announced that he had hired Quick Fix, a budget facility management company known for cutting corners and using unskilled labor. Then he introduced his replacement for me, Kyle, a 24-year-old with a degree in project management and zero experience in historic buildings. Later that afternoon, Miller told me that Mercer had stormed into my old office. He found the official company binders, the ones filled with outdated schematics and generic corporate policies. Clutter, Mercer had muttered, feeding them into the shredder. Clean slate. He grinned as the paper turned to confetti, believing he was modernizing the workflow. He didn't know that the official binders were useless. He didn't know that the only instructions that mattered were currently sitting on my dining room table 5 miles away. Deep in the sub-basement of the Obsidian Grand, unseen and unheard, a pressure valve on the main boiler began to hiss violently. The steam rose in the darkness, waiting for a command that would never come. 3 weeks later, the silence in my house was deafening. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen. Another email notification popped up. Thank you for your interest, but we have decided to pursue other candidates. It was the third rejection in a row. They didn't say it, but I knew the reason. I was overqualified. That was corporate code for too old and too expensive. I rubbed my face. It wasn't about paying the electric bill next week. It was the long-term terror. Without that job, I had lost my health insurance, which Martha needed for her treatments, and my retirement plan was in ashes. The pride I felt walking out of the gala was gone. Now there was only fear. I picked up my phone. Mercer's number was still in my contacts. I could call him. I could offer to come back as a consultant. I could beg. I knew the hotel had to be hurting by now. Maybe he would throw me a bone. My finger hovered over the call button. Don't you dare, a voice said. My wife, Martha, stood in the doorway. She walked over and gently took the phone from my hand. You built that place, Ambrose. You kept it standing when it wanted to fall. Do not let that boy buy your dignity back for a paycheck. I let out a shaky breath and nodded. You're right. Just then, a notification pinged on my laptop. It was LinkedIn. I clicked it, expecting another rejection. Instead, it was a profile view. Kalen Voss viewed your profile. My breath hitched. Kalen Voss was the CEO of Vantage Hospitality, the Obsidian's fiercest rival. He was a shark, and he was looking at me. 2 days later, I sat across from Kalen Voss in a glass-walled office that overlooked the city skyline. Voss was younger than me, sharp-eyed, and known for being ruthless. He didn't offer me coffee. He just stared at my resume. 20 years at the Obsidian, Voss said, his voice flat. That place is a fortress. Why did you leave? I could have told him everything. I could have told him about the wine, the humiliation, the way Mercer treated the staff like furniture. But I knew better. In this industry, complaining makes you look weak. Management decided to go in a different direction, I said neutrally. They wanted to modernize. Voss leaned back, studying me. Modernize? Is that what they call it? He tapped a pen on his desk. Let me ask you something, Ambrose. Does the Obsidian really have a pristine heating system? Because my engineers tell me a building that age should be a nightmare. I hesitated for a split second, then decided to gamble. Does your flagship hotel, the Vantage, have a rhythmic thumping in the HVAC on the 4th floor? Specifically near the elevators? Voss froze. His eyes widened. Yes. We've spent $50,000 trying to find the source. How did you know? Are you spying on us? No, I said calmly. My wife and I stayed there for our anniversary last month. I couldn't sleep because of the noise. It's a harmonic vibration from the cooling towers on the roof. You don't need new parts. You need to dampen the mounting brackets by 3 millimeters. Voss stared at me for a long moment. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. I don't need a general manager, Voss said. I have plenty of those. I need a director of acquisitions. I need someone who can look at a dying hotel and tell me exactly why it's bleeding. He extended his hand. You're hired. Back at the Obsidian Grand, the modernization was failing. The hiss in the sub-basement had turned into a steady, pressurized leak. The quick-fix contractor Mercer had hired took one look at it, shrugged, and wrapped the pipe in industrial duct tape. Good as new, the contractor told Kyle, the terrified 24-year-old replacement. Kyle nodded, too inexperienced to know that high-pressure steam eats duct tape for breakfast. Up in the lobby, the consequences were starting to seep through. I knew because I was reading the online reviews. A VIP guest, the wife of a senator, posted a scathing 1-star review citing a sewage smell, near the elevators. According to my former assistant, Sarah, Mercer saw the review and stormed the front desk. He didn't investigate the plumbing. He didn't call engineering. He saw a problem with optics, not infrastructure. You, Mercer snapped at the front desk clerk. Why aren't you smiling? If you smiled more, guests wouldn't focus on imaginary smells. He turned to Kyle. Order 50 plug-in air fresheners. Lavender. Mask it. But sir, Kyle stammered, shouldn't we check the pipes? We don't spend money on invisible problems, Kyle, Mercer sneered. We spend money on what guests can see. By the air fresheners. Beneath their feet, behind the drywall of the main server room, the stagnant water from the leak was pooling. It wasn't sewage, it was rot. And it was dripping directly onto the main electrical conduit. It happened during the lunch rush on a Tuesday. I was settling into my new office at Vantage when my phone blew up with texts from Miller. System down. Reservations wiped. Fire department is here. At the Obsidian, chaos reigned. The water pooling in the ceiling had finally dissolved the drywall. Gallons of hot, dirty sludge collapsed onto the main server rack, shorting out the entire reservation system. The screens at the front desk went black. Mercer stood in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by angry guests who couldn't check into their $800 a night rooms. He was sweating. He screamed at Kyle, but Kyle was helpless. The quick fix tech support was on hold. Fix it! Mercer roared. Reboot it! I can't! Kyle cried. The hardware is physically melted. Mercer needed a scapegoat. He couldn't admit he had ignored the leak. He couldn't admit he had fired the only man who knew how to protect the servers. So he spun a lie. He marched into the boardroom where the nervous directors were waiting. This isn't an accident, Mercer lied, his face red with feigned outrage. Ambrose Hale. He must have physically loosened the valves before he left. He sabotaged the pipes to drown us. My lawyer later told me that Mercer was shaking when he said it, desperate to shift the blame before the board looked too closely at his own maintenance records. The next morning, while I was drinking my coffee, a courier arrived at my door. He handed me a thick envelope. It was a cease and desist letter from the Obsidian's legal team, accusing me of malicious physical tampering and threatening a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. I stood in my kitchen, shaking with rage. The letter accused me of criminal negligence and sabotage. Mercer wasn't just content with taking my job. Now he wanted to destroy my reputation and send me to prison to cover his own incompetence. I wanted to drive over there and scream at him. I wanted to tear him apart. But Martha put a hand on my arm. Think, Ambrose. You have the leverage. I grabbed the heavy leather notebooks, my shadow logs, and drove straight to a lawyer my new boss, Voss, had recommended. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena, read the letter and then looked at my notebooks. I opened them to a page dated 5 years ago. Entry October 14th, 2019. Warned board of catastrophic vulnerability in server room ceiling. Cited risk of water damage from overhead pipes. Request for waterproofing budget, denied. Sign off, Mercer Calloway Sr., Chairman. I showed her 3 more entries. Each one a warning. Each one rejected to save money. They aren't suing you because you broke it, Elena said. They're suing me because they broke it, and they need a villain, I replied. Elena smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. This isn't just a defense, Ambrose. This is a trap. We don't reply yet. We let them file the official complaint. We let them lie on public record. Then we show the logs. She closed the notebook. Let them perjure themselves. A week later, the city announced the bid for the Global Diplomat Summit. It was a massive contract, $20 million to host world leaders for a week. It came down to 2 finalists, the Obsidian Grand and Vantage Hospitality. I sat in the strategy meeting with Kalen Voss. He was stressed. The Obsidian has the history, Voss said. The diplomats love that old world charm. We might lose this. I knew Mercer needed this win. The Obsidian was bleeding cash from the server disaster and the quick fix bills. If he lost the summit, the board would see the financial hole he had dug. I looked at the bid documents. The safety inspection was scheduled for tomorrow. That was impossible. A standard inspection for a historic building takes weeks to book. Mercer must have pulled strings or paid someone off to fast-track it. He was cutting corners, gambling everything on appearances. Voss looked at me. How do we beat them, Ambrose? Do we lower our price? I shook my head. I thought about the cease and desist letter still sitting on my desk. I thought about the reviews guests were posting online. No, I said quietly. Let them have the lead. Let them get comfortable. Why? Voss asked. Because I know what's under the floorboards, I replied. And when the inspectors actually look, really look, the Obsidian won't just lose the bid. They'll lose their license. Voss raised an eyebrow. You want to play dirty? No, I said. I want to play transparent. I want the truth to come out. Saturday night arrived, bringing with it the extravagant wedding of a tech mogul's daughter at the Obsidian Grand. It was the social event of the season, meaning every influencer in the city was live streaming it. I watched the feed on my iPad from my living room, knowing exactly what was about to happen. For years, I had manually balanced the electrical load during big events, rerouting power from the laundry and kitchen to handle the massive draw of the ballroom's AV system. It was a delicate dance I performed in the breaker room. Kyle, of course, had no idea this dance existed. At 8:15 p.m., the livestream showed the band striking up the first dance. Then, the screen went black. A massive breaker had blown in the sub-basement. I later learned from Miller what happened inside. The music died. The air conditioning groaned and stopped. For a second, there was silence, then the screams began. Fix it! Mercer shrieked, fumbling for his phone flashlight. He grabbed Kyle by the lapels. Turn it back on. I don't know how. Kyle yelled back, panic cracking his voice. The panel is smoking. You're useless. Mercer shoved him. That was the breaking point. Kyle ripped the manager badge off his chest and threw it at Mercer's feet. I quit. I'm not going to jail for this fire trap. Mercer was alone. He ran to the service elevator, descending into the dark, sweltering basement. He stared at the complex wall of switches and levers, shaking. He had fired the only man who knew which switch to flip. The darkness in the ballroom had lasted 20 minutes. Guests were using phone lights to evacuate, broadcasting their anger to the world. The bride was sobbing in the lobby. Mercer was hiding in his office, the door locked, sweating through his tuxedo. He had no chief engineer. He had no operations director. The quick fix hotline was closed for the weekend. He stared at his phone. There was only one number left. My phone rang while I was having dinner with Martha. I saw the name, Mercer Calloway. I put it on speaker. Ambrose, Mercer's voice was breathless, manic. Look, bygones, okay? We had a malfunction. A breaker. I need you to come in. Right now. I took a sip of water. I don't work there, Mercer. I'll pay you, he shouted. Consultant rate. $500 an hour. Cash. Just get down here and flip the switch. Martha watched me, her eyes hard. She shook her head. The wedding is ruined, Mercer, I said calmly. The damage is done. It's not ruined if the lights come back on, he screamed. Name your price. What do you want? Double pay? Triple? I leaned into the phone. My price is the resignation of the general manager. Submit it in writing to the board, and I'll tell you which breaker to reset. There was a stunned silence. Then pure vitriol. You arrogant old trash. I'll fix it myself. I'll ruin you. He hung up. I calmly placed my fork down. He won't fix it, I told Martha. The city safety inspection for the Diplomat Summit was scheduled for Monday morning. Mercer had spent Sunday frantically trying to patch the holes. He had hired expensive emergency electricians to bypass the blown breaker, essentially hot-wiring the hotel's grid. It was dangerous, illegal, and temporary. But he thought he had the inspector in his pocket. He didn't know I had made a move of my own. I didn't send an anonymous tip. That would be too easy to ignore. Instead, my lawyer, Elena, formally submitted a packet of evidence to the City Planning Commission on behalf of Vantage Hospitality regarding public safety concerns. Inside was a copy of the original 1990 blueprints of the Obsidian, blueprints that showed the sub-basement B, a lower level that had been sealed off years ago due to drainage issues. Mercer didn't even know it existed. He thought the basement ended at the boiler room. I included a sworn affidavit from my time as director. The dampness isn't coming from the pipes. It's coming from below. Check level B. It wasn't a bribe. It was a map. A map to the rot Mercer had been covering up with air fresheners and paint. Monday morning, the inspector arrived at the Obsidian. He didn't go to the lobby. He walked straight to the service entrance, holding a warrant. Mercer met the inspector at the service elevator, smiling his fake, charming smile. Inspector, welcome. We have coffee and pastries in the... I don't want pastries, Mr. Calloway, the inspector said, his face grim. I want to see the access hatch to sub-basement B. Mercer's smile faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. There is no sub-basement B. The blueprints submitted to my office say otherwise. The inspector motioned to two police officers behind him. Step aside. They found the hatch under a heavy rubber mat in the laundry room. It had been rusted shut. The police pried it open with crowbars. A smell wafted up, thick, pungent, and wet. The smell of stagnation. The inspector shone a high-powered flashlight down the hole. The beam hit water. Dark, black water. "It's flooded," the inspector said, his voice echoing. 3 feet deep. The structural columns are sitting in sludge. He stood up and looked at Mercer. Mercer was pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Black mold," the inspector noted, running a finger along the hatch rim. "This has been festering for months. It's in the ventilation." He pulled a bright orange sticker from his clipboard. "Condemned." He slapped it right onto the boiler room door. "You are shut down, Mr. Calloway," the inspector said. "The summit bid is disqualified. Effective immediately." The news broke within the hour. Historic Obsidian Grand condemned, unsafe for diplomats. The hotel stock price didn't just fall, it evaporated. Reservations were canceled in waves. The Obsidian was empty, dark, and branded a death trap. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. They were facing financial ruin. They needed to authorize emergency funds to fix the foundation immediately to save the hotel. The chairman authorized the release of $2 million from the capital maintenance reserve. But when the CFO tried to transfer the money, the account was empty. That triggered the audit. The auditors reviewed the budget for the last year. They found digital records showing Mercer had approved payments for structural waterproofing and foundation repair. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the work hadn't been done. The auditors traced the payments. The money had gone to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. A company owned by Mercer Calloway. He hadn't just neglected the hotel. He had been siphoning the maintenance budget to pay off his personal gambling debts, gambling that the old building would hold up just a little longer. He lost that bet. The chairman of the board, Mercer's own uncle, looked at the evidence, then at his nephew. "You stole from us," he whispered. "You stole, and you let the hotel rot." "We have to sell," another board member shouted. "Right now. Before the lawsuits hit. We need to liquidate." The board of directors sat in the dim boardroom, the air thick with defeat. They had no liquidity. The lawsuits from the wedding fiasco and the city fines were piling up. They needed a buyer, and they needed one fast. Kalen Voss walked in, looking like a man who had already won. I walked in beside him. Mercer was there, slumped in a chair in the corner, stripped of his voting rights but forced to watch. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He couldn't. "Gentlemen," Voss said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "Vantage Hospitality is prepared to acquire the Obsidian Grand. As is." The chairman picked up the paper. His hands shook. This is a fraction of the valuation. It's pennies on the dollar. It's a condemned building with a flooded basement and a ruined reputation, I said, speaking for the first time. "You aren't selling a hotel. You're selling a liability." The chairman looked at me, then at Mercer. The shame in his eyes was palpable. He signed the paper. The deal was done. The Obsidian Grand now belonged to Vantage. Voss turned to me in the hallway. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy brass master key, the one Mercer had taken from me months ago. "It's yours again, Ambrose," Voss said. "Fix it." The next morning, I walked through the front doors of the Obsidian. It was quiet. The lobby was empty of guests, but the staff, the ones who hadn't quit or been fired, were gathered near the front desk. They looked tired, scared. They didn't know if the new owners were going to fire them all. I stopped in the center of the lobby. "My name is Ambrose Hale," I announced, my voice echoing off the marble. "And I am the general manager." A murmur went through the crowd. Then Sarah, the front desk clerk Mercer had yelled at, started to clap. Slowly, others joined in. It wasn't a roar, it was a wave of relief. I raised a hand. "We have work to do. First order of business. Miller and the engineering team are rehired, effective immediately. Full back pay." Cheers erupted. I didn't stop. I walked past the security desk to the elevators. I pressed the button for the penthouse office. I had one last piece of trash to take out. When I reached the top floor, the door was locked from the inside. Mercer had barricaded himself in, refusing to accept the reality of his termination. I signaled the guards to override the lock. "You can't come in here," he shouted as the door swung open. He was sweeping personal items into a box and frantically downloading files onto a hard drive. "This is my office." "Not anymore," I said, stepping inside. Mercer looked disheveled. His tie was loose, his hair messy. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the panic of a trapped animal. You planned this, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. You sabotaged the pumps. You wrecked this place just to buy it cheap. I walked over to the desk I had sat behind for years as director of operations, the desk he had stolen. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out one of my leather shadow logs. I slammed it down on the wood. The sound made him jump. I didn't wreck it, Mercer, I said, my voice cold and hard. I just stopped holding it up. You let it fall. I picked up the phone on the desk. Security to the penthouse. 2 guards appeared in the doorway, men I had hired 10 years ago, men who had been waiting for this moment. They didn't look at Mercer with respect. They looked at him like an intruder. Escort Mr. Calloway off the premises, I ordered. And take him via the service elevator. Past the garbage bins. We don't want to upset the guests. You can't do this. Mercer screamed as they grabbed his arms. Do you know who I am? The guard on his right tightened his grip. Yes, the guard said. You're a trespasser. The next 6 months were a war. But this time I had the army. I was in the trenches every day. I didn't sit in the office. I put on my coveralls and went down to the sub-basement with Miller. We drained the black water. We scrubbed the mold from the beams. We replaced the rusted pipes that Mercer had ignored. It was grueling, dirty work. But it was honest. We tore out the cheap quick-fix wiring and reinstalled the proper heavy-duty breakers. We trained the new staff properly, using my shadow logs as the curriculum. The hotel began to breathe again. Slowly, the condemned stickers were peeled off. The city inspector returned, skeptical at first, but left impressed. It's solid, he told me, signing the occupancy permit. Solid as a rock. 1 year after the gala disaster, we held the grand reopening of the Vantage Obsidian. The lobby shined. The air smelled of fresh lilies, not sewage. The governor returned to cut the ribbon. I stood in the back, watching the lights glow. The hotel wasn't just fixed, it was better. It had its soul back. While the Obsidian rose, Mercer Calloway fell. The board didn't just fire him. They sued him for the embezzlement of the maintenance funds. His uncle, the chairman, testified against him to save his own skin. The family cut him off completely to distance themselves from the scandal. Mercer lost his penthouse condo. His sports car was repossessed. His name became toxic in the hospitality industry. He applied for executive jobs, but every Google search of his name brought up articles about the sewage hotel and his fraud. He was blacklisted. Broke and facing legal fees, Mercer hit rock bottom. He moved into a cheap studio apartment on the edge of town. The high-flying MBA graduate, the man who mocked the working class, was now desperate for any cash he could find. One rainy Tuesday, he walked into a day labor temp agency, the only one in the city that accepted workers with pending lawsuits. He sat in a plastic chair, wearing worn-out clothes, waiting for his number to be called. "Calloway," the dispatcher yelled. "I got a night shift. Industrial cleaning. Minimum wage. You want it or not?" Mercer swallowed his pride. He was hungry. "I'll take it," he whispered. It was late on a Tuesday night. The Vantage Obsidian was fully booked for the Diplomat Summit, the contract we had won back from the city. The lobby was quiet, settling into the hushed rhythm of a luxury hotel at night. I sat in the general manager's office, the same room where Mercer had once shredded my manuals. The desk was organized now. My shadow logs were lined up on the shelf like trophies. I poured myself a glass of water from a pitcher. As I set it down, my hand slipped slightly, and a small splash of water hit the Persian rug. I stared at the dark spot on the fabric. It triggered a memory. The gala. The wine. The feeling of the cold marble against my knees while Mercer laughed. I picked up the phone. I called the housekeeping supervisor. "It's Ambrose. I spilled some water. But the office needs a deep clean anyway before the summit meetings tomorrow. The floors, the baseboards. Everything. I'm short on night staff, Mr. Hale," the supervisor apologized. "I had to call that 24-hour agency for a sub-crew. I'll send the new guy up. He's the only one available for the grunt work." "That's fine," I said. "Send him up." I went back to my paperwork, signing off on the catering orders. I didn't think twice about who was coming. 15 minutes later, the service elevator dinged down the hall. A man stepped out, pushing a yellow mop bucket on squeaky wheels. He wore a generic, ill-fitting gray jumpsuit with the temp agency's logo on the back. His head was down. He pulled the brim of his cap low, trying to hide his face. His shoulders were slumped, the posture of a man who had been beaten down by life. He looked rough, unshaven, tired, broken. He stopped outside my office door. He took a deep breath, like he was steeling himself. He knew exactly where he was, and the shame radiated off him like heat. He knocked timidly. "Come in," I called out, not looking up from my documents. The door opened. The smell of cheap industrial cleaner wafted in. The man wheeled the bucket inside. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, terrified of eye contact. He wrung out the mop. Slosh. Drip. He started mopping the entryway. I signed the last page of the contract. I capped my pen. Something about the man's hesitant movement caught my eye. I looked up. It was Mercer. He hadn't seen me yet. He was focused intently on the floor, humming a nervous, tuneless melody to himself, scrubbing at a scuff mark on the wood. He looked older, harder. The soft hands of the executive were gone, replaced by raw knuckles. I watched him for a full minute. The silence in the room was heavy. I slowly swiveled my high-back leather chair around to face him fully. "You missed a spot," I said. Mercer froze. His humming stopped abruptly. The mop handle clattered against the bucket. He knew that voice. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, he lifted his head under the cap. Our eyes locked. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. He wasn't just cleaning an office. He was cleaning my office. "Ambrose," he breathed, the name barely a whisper. He looked around as if searching for an escape, but there was only the door behind him. He gripped the mop handle like it was a lifeline. For a moment, I saw the fear in his eyes. He expected me to yell. He expected me to fire him, to kick him out, to humiliate him the way he had humiliated me in front of 300 people. He braced himself for the cruelty he would have dished out. I stood up. Mercer flinched. He took a step back, nearly tripping over his bucket. I walked around the desk. I stopped a few feet from him. I looked down at the floor where he had been mopping. "The technique is wrong, Mercer," I said quietly. He blinked, confused. "What?" "You're pushing the dirt around," I said, pointing to the streak on the wood. "You have to lift it. Figure-8 motion. Otherwise, you're just spreading the mess." I looked him in the eye. "Just like you did with the accounts." Mercer stared at me, trembling. He waited for the final blow. I didn't give it to him. I wasn't him. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I picked up my pen. "Finish the job," I said, returning to my work. "I'm paying for a clean floor." Mercer stood there for a long time, stunned. He realized I wasn't going to fire him. I was going to let him work. I was giving him the dignity of a paycheck, something he had tried to deny me. Slowly, he nodded. Yes, sir." He dipped the mop back into the bucket. He started again. This time, he used the figure-8 motion. He focused. He worked. The room was silent except for the rhythmic swish-swish of the mop and the scratching of my pen on paper. 20 minutes later, the floor was spotless. Mercer wrung out the mop. He looked at me one last time, a mixture of shame and gratitude on his face. He backed out of the room, pulling the bucket with him. "Good night, Mr. Hale," he whispered. "Good night, Mercer," I replied without looking up. The door clicked shut. I was alone. I swiveled my chair to face the window. Below, the city lights of Chicago glittered like diamonds. The hotel was full. The staff was happy. The foundation was solid. I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow sip. It wasn't vintage Cabernet. It was just coffee. But it tasted perfect. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need to scream. Sometimes justice is just a clean floor.